Good day. Today we will discuss the learner-centered and teaching foundation and characteristics. By the way, I'm Jonathan Bipe from Study Hub 4. Students are the most important part of learning. Each student is different because of their background, abilities, and environment. Teachers should use different ways of teaching to help every student learn better and reach their full potential. This type of teaching puts students first instead of just listening to the teacher. Students take part in learning by asking questions, discussing with classmates, and solving problems. Teachers guide them and adjust their teaching to the match how students learn best. This helps students understand and remember lessons for a long time. Characteristics of learner-centered teaching. Students take on active role. In many classrooms, teachers do most of the work while students just listen. In learner-centered teaching, students are involved in discussions, activities, and problem solving, making learning more fun and meaningful. Learner-centered teaching includes explicit skills instruction. Students learn how to think, to solve problems, and analyze information. These skills help them not only in school but also in real life. Help students reflect on learning. Students learn to think about how they study and how they can improve. They take responsibility for their learning, such as preparing for exams and improving their writing. Give students some control or over-learning. Instead of following strict rules, students get choices in how they learn. This makes them more interested and motivated to study. Teachers still guide them to make a good choices. Encourages teamwork. Students work together, share ideas, and help each other learn. Teachers create a classroom everyone support each other. And that's all for my.
Good day everyone, I am Ladesma Irish Jane R, presenter number 2 from Study Hub 4. So now let's discuss the second topic. So this is all about the way we see things has a huge impact in our lives. The shift from teacher-centered to learner-centered teaching facilitates the adoption of new practices that is applicable at present. The teacher's role from being a provider of information to being a facilitator of learning. The shift increases the engagement of students in the learning process and makes the learners more responsible for their own learning. By creating this environment, you increase the motivation of students to remain engaged in the learning process. You also foster independence and allow students differences and learning style which conforms to the learner's needs. So now let's discuss the different philosophical perspective, which is the teacher-centered philosophies. First is we have essentialism. Essentialism is an American philosophy of education which begins in the 1930s and 1940s and was introduced by William Bagley. The two origins of essentialism are from idealism and realism. It is often called traditionalism or conservatism. It is an educational theory that believes that the purpose of schooling is an impact necessary knowledge, skills, and attributes to enable young people to function as fully developed human beings in the modern world. So, it simply means essentialism is a basically teaches that basic subject or the core curriculum. Second is we have perennialism. Perennialism is the most conservative, traditional, or flexible philosophy. It is largely a product of Aristotle's rationalism and its subsequent treatment by Thomas Aquinas. It assumes that man's basic or essential characteristics is his ability to reason, Only through reason can man understand existence and how he is required to live. Perennialists believe that one should teach the things that they believe are of everlasting importance to all individuals everywhere. Third is we have progressivism. Progressivism, the proponents of this philosophy are William Kilpatrick and John Dewey. Progressivism emphasizes the concept of progress, which asserts that human beings are capable of improving and perfecting their environment. Progressivists believe that people learn best from what they consider most relevant to their lives. Students learn best when they pursue their own interests, satisfying their needs. In other words, learning by doing. Curriculum is built on the needs, experiences, abilities, and interests of students. Fourth is we have humanism. Humanism is a student-centered philosophy that focuses on enhancing one's innate goodness, rejects the idea of group-oriented education, and upholds the idea of enhancing individual development. This philosophy also believes that students should be actively involved with their education on all levels, and students should be able to make choices about what they will learning. The purpose of humanism is to create interest in all spheres of life. Believes learning is viewed as a personal act to fulfill one's potential. Believes in the necessity of studying a person as a whole, particular as they grow and develop over a lifespan. Fifth or last is the constructivism. Constructivism refers to the idea that learners construct knowledge for themselves. Each learner individually and socially construct meaning as he or she learns. It suggests that learners should be active participants in learning activities, that learning should be guided rather than presented by teachers, and that interaction and discussion are critical components of the learning process. Learning happens when students combine new and old ideas. However, learning occurs if students are actively engaged. It is also a learning theory that equates learning with creating meaning from experiences. So that's all for my discussion about the philosophical perspective. I hope you learned a lot from my discussion and thank you for watching.
Resistance to change, managing the shift. It is human nature to counteract any changes, but change is inevitable. The reason why people resist to change is because it is not easy transition and there is the fear of the unknown. Students resist learner-centered approaches for a variety of reasons. The four most common reasons students resist learner-centered approaches are: number one, learner-centered approaches are more work. These approaches are more work for faculty who now face complex instructional design issues. But the students resist because they are quickly realize that this means much more work for them as well. Resistance that is based on the increased amount of work is resistance for the right reason for the teacher's perspective. Number two, learner-centered approaches are more threatening. Students also resist these approaches because they are afraid. The teacher has opened Pandora's box and is let out all sorts of unknown and unfamiliar policies, practices, assignments, and expectations not regularly encountered in other classes. The fear becomes a major anxiety for students who face learning tasks without confidence in themselves as learners. In some students' resistance says more about self-perceptions than it does about the approach. Number three, learner-centered approaches involve losses by Claus 1994. points out that whenever you move from one level of understanding to another, something is lost. We as teachers need to remember that growth creates a sense of loss in students. The loss of certainty that has sustained them and been a refuge in an increasingly complex and confused world. These approaches take our students to new places where the responsibility and ownership for what does and does not happen is much more obviously theirs. Some students' resistance is about loss and longings for the simpler way this used to be. These may understand intellectually that the new approaches are good for them and foster their personal development, but the feeling of loss is an emotional for this one that sometimes manifests itself as resistance. Number 4. Learner-centered approaches may be beyond students. If students are unfair to students and unethical or ask students to engage in ethically compromised behavior, then we should hope that students would resist despite the past that they may do so at some personal risk. But the learner-centered techniques selected may ask students to take approaches, complete work-employing methods, or use particular structures that are beyond students' abilities to handle. Faculty resistance. Students are not only ones who resist these approaches. Some colleagues and administrators will object as well. Their resistance will be just as disheartening. It might be professionally threatening too. As with students, it is important to analyze the basis of their resistance. On what grounds do they object? Then consider how a faculty member committed to learner-centered approaches and anxious to implement them can deal with resistance at this level. In sources of faculty resistance, the objections that colleagues raise come primarily from two sources. They object because they find the approaches enormously threatening learner-centered approaches test as a teacher's level of self-confidence. They deal with issues of power and authority. They take us away from exclusive reliance on content, expertise, and move into the new or unfamiliar domain of learning skills. They raise questions about common instructional practices. Some colleagues resist for much more objective reasons. They are concerned about what these approaches do. Diminish the amount of content in course, let students set course policies, devote class time to developing learner skills and awareness, employ rules and requirements, and involve students in assessment activities. For many faculty, these are radical ideas and they raise quite legitimate questions about them. This is why it is important for those using these approaches to understand something of the empirical, theoretical, and experiential basis on which they rest. And as with some kind of student resistance, these are objections from the right reasons. There are questions we can answer and they can provide us opportunities to inform, educate, and move more faculty forward in their thinking about learning and the kind of teaching that promotes it. Strategies in dealing with faculty resistance: number 1, be mindful of the politics. Number 2, use the autonomy of your classroom. Number 3, do not seek to convert the masses. Number 4, document the impact of your approaches. Number 5, find like-minded colleagues. Students and faculty resistance will keep us honest about what we are doing and why. It helps to see it positively, the rub that reminds us to continue exploring the theory and research. As well as the experience of colleagues, many of us will tell you that student resistance fades and is then gone well before that of colleagues. Lots could be said that, but the net effect is the once students are on board, there really is no turning back. They will move you forward despite the objections and resistance of some colleagues. By Weimer M. 2002.
So, good afternoon everyone. My name is Fatima Shedra bin Muhajiran, reporter number 4. Reporter number 3 has already discussed the resistance of change, managing the shift, and now I will discuss the dimensions of learner-centered teaching. So, what is learner-centered of teaching? When we say learner-centered teaching, it is a modern approach that focuses on students. It differs from teacher-centered teaching in that it emphasizes student learning goals, engagement, and responsibility. So, according to Wimmer on 2002, there are 5 practices or dimensions that need to change to achieve learner-centered teaching. But I will only discuss the 3 dimensions and the rest will be discussed by fifth reporter. So the first practices or dimensions are the functions of content, the role of instructor, and the last one is who should take responsibility for learning. So number 1, functions of content. The content not only builds a knowledge base but also helps students in various ways like appreciation for content, encourage students to value the content, learning methodologies, develop student discipline specific methodologies, inquiry and thinking, promotes inquiry and different ways of thinking within a discipline, problem solving, aims to teach students how to solve real-world problems, engagement and meaning, engage students how to make the content their own and derive personal meaning, organized framework, helps students develop a structured way to learn within their discipline. And the last one is future application, frames content to show its future applicability. So number 2, the role of instructor. The instructor's role is to create an environment that fosters learning, accommodates learning styles, aligns objectives and assessment, utilizes teaching, designs interactive activities, and motivates intrinsic learning. So fosters learning, encourage students learning, accommodates learning styles, supports different learning styles, aligns objectives and assessment, consistently aligns objectives, teaching methods and assessment, utilizes teaching techniques, uses multiple techniques suitable for student learning goals, designs interactive activities, designs activities that involve interaction with the material, the teacher, and the peers, motivates intrinsic learning, encourage students to learn for intrinsic reasons. So number 3, who should take responsibility for learning? This section likely discusses the distribution of responsibility between students and instructors in the learning process. So these dimensions emphasize a shift from traditional teaching methods to a more interactive and student-centered approach, focusing on the development of skills, critical thinking, and personal engagement with the content. So that would be all.
Hello, good day, and now let me continue the topic. So why do we assess student? So assessment is an essential part of teaching and learning. It serves a multiple purpose, including measuring and learning process. It helps educators to determine whether students have achieved the intended learning outcomes. Well, it provides feedback, gives or guides the students in understanding their strengths and areas for their self-improvement. Enhancing teaching strategies allow instructors to adjust their teaching methods based on the student performance, and also to encouraging student engagement. When assessment are meaningful, students become more involved, in their learning process. Well, next up, the accountability ensures that learning standards are met and helps institution evaluate curriculum effectiveness. Well, the purpose and the process of assessment. So we have the purpose. First up, the purpose to diagnose students' prior knowledge and skills. To promote also, to promote the learning through formative feedback. Okay. To certify and grade student achievement. To support their self-directed learning by helping students set goals. Well, the process, the process is formative assessment for learning. So the students keep ongoing assessments such as quizzes, reflections, and peer feedback to support their learning. Summative assessment. This the assessment is to final evaluation like exams, project, and presentation to measure their overall achievements. Well, this authentic assessment, real world tasks such as case studies, portfolios, and simulations that that can reflect practical applications of knowledge. Self and peer assessment encourages students to evaluate their peers' work, promoting self-regulate learning. So third, the balance of power learning-centered teaching. So the traditional teaching often places the teacher in complete control of their learning decisions. Learning-centered teaching shifts to come the power to students, allowing them to take an active role in their education. Well, the shared decision making students, instead of teacher dictating everything, students have to say in learning activities, assessment, and classroom policies. So they can share it also there. So the encouraging autonomy, students are responsible for their learning, fostering independence, and for their motivational self as well. So, flexible learning path, different students learning in different ways. Learner-centered teaching allow us to personalize approaches. Well, also the collaboration over authority. Teachers act as facilitators rather than solo authorities, guiding students to construct their own knowledge or cognitive. Well, in learning centered, classroom assessment and power dynamics work together to create more engaging and effective learning experience to students to became a great example.